I'll just try to keep my eye on both. I'd like to really welcome you, especially those of you who are new. You're going to have an experience today that I think you'll enjoy yourselves, and I hope that you'll enjoy it enough that you'll take it back and you'll either tell somebody else or you'll use it yourself in a classroom or where community group, whatever may be most comfortable for you to start. As I said, I am recording, so if you have a problem with that, you can just either hide yourself or mute yourself. And I would ask that once we start sharing the actual experience, until I ask for feedback, if you keep yourself muted, that would be very helpful. I never remember to mute everybody myself, so it's just helpful if you can remember to do that. I'd like to take about 30 seconds for each of you and just have you introduce yourself and if you're a member of the league, tell me what league you're from, and if you are, and tell me what state you're from, and then just a couple of seconds of why are you here. So Judy, you're up in my upper left-hand corner, so I'm going to start with you.
Somehow this system is all changed and the buttons are in different places. I'm Judy and I'm from Seattle, King County unit of the League of Women Voters. And I think I got in on I've been with about 4 years, three
Mm-hmm.
years.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And yeah, we're doing a lot to promote it and hoping more and more people pick it up.
Right.
There
You
you go.
should take a look at their website too. And Judy, you should meet Nikki because she lives half time in the state of Washington and half time in the state of Florida. So I think she would be a good person well, both of you would be a good person
Right.
to bounce off ideas with one another. Jean, you're the next one on my screen. Oh, I'm sorry,
Okay,
Judy. Did you tell me why you're here today and again?
sure. My name's Jean Itzberg. I'm from the New Jersey Greater Princeton Area League, and I've, yes, taken this class. Probably this is my third time, but I heard through the grapevine that there had been some wonderful changes, and I wanted to know what had changed. And I'm always hopeful that I'll find some place to actually use these things. So I keep
Use
taking the
them.
classes. Still hopeful.
Good. Okay, Rebecca.
Hi, I'm from the Red Bank, New Jersey area, and I'm a brand new member, and I'm really just trying to learn what we do and how we can be involved.
Wonderful. Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki Amarantides, and like you said, I live 5 months in Seattle and 7 months in Pinellas County, Florida, and I'm part of the League of Women Voters there. And I'm sending Judith a little chat saying, let's have coffee, which is what we do in Seattle. So great to be here.
Okay, Meg.
I might want to be in on that also. I'm League of Women Voters Oregon, and we're launching our partnership with Girl Scouts. And part of our Girl Scout Council is involved, includes part of Washington. So we're working with the southern counties in Washington also.
That's
So
awesome.
we're launching Voter Girl, which we got from Kent, Ohio, which is a badge curriculum, and other learning opportunities for Girl Scouts. So this curriculum, Energizing Young Voters, looked very enticing. And we have an excellent student mock election program in Oregon, and we're going to be offering kind of a cafe menu for Girl Scouts of all ages. So I love to use this as a resource and find out what other leagues across the country are doing with Girl Scouts.
That's wonderful. Good. One of our co-chairs of the youth advisory board that we have has been a long time Girl Scout, and she got her gold award. So if you have questions from the youth's point of view, I'd be happy to connect you with her. So
Perfect. Yeah, please do.
okay, Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Chait. I'm a member of the New Jersey Monmouth County League of Women Voters. And I'm here because I think energizing young voters is amazing. And I want to keep informed and be able to, I guess, get even more informed to maybe talk to some people who might be interested in delivering this and who haven't before. So just want to keep informed and stay involved as much as I can.
Thanks, Barbara. Fran.
Hi, I'm Fran McCarrigan from here in New Jersey, and I work side by side with Pat Sapui.
Mary Lou?
Hi, I'm Mary Lou Handy from New Jersey in Bergen County in Ridgewood. I've been an educator for many, many years and recently retired after teaching middle school American history,
Oh, wow.
civics for 25 years.
Oh my goodness.
And this is my
Uh-oh.
second year in League of Women Voters because I couldn't really do it and teach. It just didn't work. But it's given me a way. I've done one class in energizing young voters. It's a way for me to have my foot in the classroom, but not the full-time responsibility. And I did it in New Jersey. I did the primary just before the election, the day before. And it was just so amazing. It got me so invigorated. And as much as I'm sort of missing going back to school this year, this was giving me something this week to get some more classes, to get out in the classroom and to do some things. So thank you so much.
I'm delighted. Christine O'Neill.
I'm also from Ridgewood, New Jersey, and I think I worked with you, Mary Lou, once at maybe Midland Park High School, and we did voter registration.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So and I have been working closely with Beth Grossman as Mary Lou and anyone in the Ridgewood area has been doing. We did a wonderful program on the suffragette timeline at Moa High School that I was just blown away by, and I've been raving about it to those within the Unitarian Society that I belong and others, because it was so well done, so organized, and it was only a PowerPoint, but it engaged the students in the whole class. They were laughing, enjoying, saying, "What? Is that real?" And it was just wonderful. And I just saw how in one class, it was a civics class, and the teacher had allowed us the whole time period, her class time, which was a gift. And I just was really taken by the students being so engaged.
Happy, really happy to hear that. Beth is quite a powerhouse. She's a
Yes.
good introduction to the materials. Meg Thompson. Oh, you were the Girl Scouts, right? We talked to you.
I already spoke.
Right. People are shifting around on my screen, and so I'm getting confused. Cecile.
Hi, I'm Cease Kent from the Morris area League of Women Voters. I participated with some of the Drew students in middle school programs, and I've been really interested in how do we educate voters more on how to make determinations around voting. Wall Street Journal did a big article recently that people don't understand things like who and how their Medicaid is cared for, and when somebody takes it away, who they should blame, and things like that. I understand that this Energizing Young Voters has some high school version things that are helpful in helping people to understand how they should vote and how to look at policy and who they should be voting for. So I'm looking forward to that.
Good. We don't tell anybody who's to vote for, but we do give you the skills in order
Right.
to make the choice that matches your values. I just want to make that clear up front because I am frantic to make sure that people understand that we are not just nonpartisan like the League is, but we're also issue agnostic, because if we are not, schools are very reluctant to have us come in to work with them. So that's one differentiation from the League, but I'm glad that you mentioned what you did. All right, Sean, you're the last one on my screen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I'm new to this this training, so I'm happy to be. I know I'm going to learn a lot, so I'm happy to be here about that. I like I think it was Mary Lou that said she was just recently retired. I am also an educator. I retired from teaching high school social science, both AP and CP, here in California in the Bay Area. I'm with the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley. And besides enjoying learning, because that's sort of an ongoing thing with me, I am the co-chair for voter services for our league,
Wonderful.
but we've also recently started, we're trying to get it off the ground, a youth council for our league. And right now we have 3 founding members who are absolutely amazing young people. One of them just graduated from high school, and the other 2 will be starting their senior year this year. And then, I can't remember which one of my colleagues here on the screen talked about the Girl Scouts. Was that you, Christine? No.
It was me, Meg Thompson.
Oh, Meg. There you go. I lost you in your name. Just your words were there for your name, the letters for your name. But had a wonderful time last election cycle, because for the first time, and when the opportunity first arose, there was no release yet from National about having partnered with the Girl Scouts. But I had a Girl Scout troop leader reach out to me in the early part of the year because the young girls were working on their democracy badge. And it was like an amazing moment in doing voter reg and election cycle work as a voter service lead. And as it turned out, I ended up with 5 different Girl Scout groups that I ended up being with and talking about suffrage and talking about voting. And oh my gosh, it was such a gift in the middle of so much craziness.
Yeah.
So I hear you, and I'm so happy. I wrote down what you said about Voter Girl, and I would love to connect with you to learn more about what you learned from, I think you said Ohio, yes?
That's from Kent.
Kent, Ohio sells a Voter Girl plug-in ready package, but we're trying, it's badge ready for all 6 levels of Girl Scouts and curriculum. But also we're trying to integrate other levels into our offerings to the Girl Scouts. So like our mock election program and gold award mentoring and that kind of thing. So but yes, sure.
Okay.
Are people able to email each other? I don't know how that
at the end of the session today, I will send out the recording of today and some notes from today. And I'll promise you, as things happen, I'll say, oh, I'll send you that, or, I'll give you that name or whatever. And I try to keep track of that. When I go back through the recording, I usually remember it. Fran, you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. I've spoken to Meg Thompson, listening to all of you, and you have to excuse that phone. Listening to all of you that are bringing up Girl Scouts, why don't we all get together on some calls and share a lively conversation about where we are with the Girl Scouts, what worked for you, and so I'll send that out to everybody. But I think that would be a rich sharing experience for all of us. Okay.
I'd love to get a national network going. The Voter Girl, they did a caucus at nationals in 2020, and a lot of leagues bought it, but COVID happened and not many leagues launched it successfully. Right. Now they have a lot of new buyers, but there's no point in us reinventing the wheel. And I can send out a list of the states and leagues that have purchased it, but I don't see that it's gotten very successfully off the ground except in Kent, and they do pretty active work.
Monmouth County.
Ohio. It's a delightful program and badge specific.
Monmouth County in New Jersey has been doing Voter Girl for a good number of years. So
Yeah.
I will also try to remember to give you the name of the person who heads that program up in our league.
Okay.
But at any rate, let's get on. One of the things you've all mentioned how much those of you who've participated in one, how much it has meant to you. We have a short video that was made by the Civic Story, which is an independent journalism resource that looks for things around New Jersey. And one of the things they did was to pick up on a program that took place in one of the schools here. I'm only going to play half of it because the other half is all about New Jersey, but I think you'll enjoy what the kids have to say.
In classrooms across New Jersey, students are learning that voting isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. At Cicely Tyson School for Performing and Fine Arts, myself and fellow students are taking a closer look at the history of voting and why it still matters today.
The League of Women Voters, we're providing students with an engaging history of voting rights in America, presented in a very, very nonpartisan forum.
Our goal is to defend democracy and register voters. Today, we are going to talk about the timeline of suffrage.
Voting to me means that our voices get to be heard.
It's a way for us to actually be able to advocate for ourselves. Voting is essentially our voice in this political world.
From the birth of our nation, people have fought, they've gone to war, to jail, and they have died for the right to vote.
But learning about voting isn't just about history. It's about the choices we make today.
Everyone likes to focus on the presidential elections every 4 years, but the greatest impact that a voter can make is through participation in their local elections.
Those little clips are the kinds of comments that we get from students on something that we call exit tickets. Every time we go into a classroom and have the kids experience one of the lessons, at the end, we ask them to just finish 2 short sentence stems. What's something you believed at the beginning or you thought about before this class that has changed in your thinking, especially if it's something personal? And those comments from the students are remarkable. I can only think of, out of thousands of students that I've been in front of one student who had a negative impact. That's remarkable in today's world. Now, maybe everything didn't impact them, but they each walked out with something that was important to them. And that's what's important to us. We're hoping to change attitudes towards voting. Energizing Young Voters now, after 6 years of development, has 3 basic elements to it. One of them is the curriculum, and that was really our focus in the beginning. But we also now focus on voter registration, and we're talking about student-directed or student-led voter registrations. We have a partnership with the Civic Center, which is theciviccenter.org, and they have an amazing program set up. It's so easy to implement, you wouldn't believe it. The kids can pick it up, do it themselves. What they have to do is write out a plan. They have to get one person in the school to act as a supervisor who doesn't need to do anything except sign the paper saying that it's something that they want to, supervise kids with. The kids run the drive, and then they have to write a very short report at the end. And in the past, and I think this might still be the case, those students who do it get a $150 gift card, which is very motivating. A school can have 3 students do it, or can have a club do it, and the club or those 3 students will get $450 for their school. So that's something that I think you should look up. Fran, do you want to put the Civic Center in the chat for me? And I will ask you to have your chat open today because we're going to be using it during the presentation. So that, and then we have an ambassador program, and I know that I've spoken to some of your leagues about that. When you talk about the Youth Council, that is not exactly the same thing because the Youth Council is really focused on league work. And what our ambassador program is a safe place for young people to learn the skills in an environment where it's their voices. So they learn to be They learn to promote themselves, they learn to promote their own ideas, and then they transition into the league, knowing that they've got important things to say without worrying about old ladies like me telling them what they should say, or if there's an old lady like me that says that's a stupid idea, they know it's not really a stupid idea. They can stand up for themselves. So, and the other thing about working with a league in that manner is that as the students develop, one of the things they develop, for example, are the skills of like going through the state bills that are coming up in whatever legislative session, picking ones that they care about related to K-12 education, studying those, and eventually taking a position, either supporting or opposing or supporting with amendments, and then learning how to testify on that bill. And they actually go to Trenton, which is our capital, and testify. That's advocacy that we can't do. So we give them the skills, and then we say, here, league, you take them. And they're more than happy to do that. And they coach them, and it is just a really wonderful experience. We also have young people who are ambassadors who've joined committees in the state league. And they are also invited to become members of the state board of the state league's board. Most of them I found think that's a good idea until they realize that they have to be completely nonpartisan. They can't put signs, they can't promote a candidate. And so they say, I'm not ready for that yet. I really want to have a voice and say something. So those are the three basic things. Today, we're going to focus on the curriculum, and we're going to focus on the original lesson, which is the Timeline of Suffrage, which has morphed over the years into something that I think is so much more powerful. And yet it was powerful to begin with. And then we're going to help you understand how to teach. If you're interested in teaching it, you can also just know about it and tell somebody else. There's no obligation to be a presenter after this. But it helps the kids understand who has the power right now to make the decisions in our nation. And if they voted, who would have the power? And that's the second one that you're going to experience today. Okay. As far as the curriculum goes, one of the things that we ask you to do is to follow the script, meaning that the basic concepts that are in that lesson should be adhered to. All of the things that are in the scripts that we'll use today have been researched, so you know you're providing accurate information. But there are differences from context to context. So, for example, I live in a lower income area in New Jersey. When I go into those schools, there might be 1, 2, 3 white faces in the crowd. So I need to adapt it to the things that are most important to the kids in the classes that I'm in, so that it's meaningful to them. There are urban areas in New Jersey. That requires a little bit of modification too. There are really rural areas in New Jersey, believe it or not. If you've only traveled up and down the turnpike, you might not know that, but there are very rural areas. So each one of those requires a little bit of a shift. There are other states that only have vote by mail. New Jersey has both. So you need to adapt it for that. There are states, for example, Montana, and Rebecca Johnson was one of the first people who started using it out of state. And there is a very large indigenous population in her league. And so they emphasized the struggle that indigenous people had had in order to gain the ability to vote, not just the right to vote, but the actual ability. And then they actually wound up creating an entirely separate, but modeled after our timeline of suffrage, specifically for the indigenous population. The state of Arizona took our student advocate toolkit and modified it for their state. So all of those things are fine, as long as you follow the basic script, the basic ideas that are in the programs that we have. Each one of our lessons, as somebody mentioned, I think it was, I can't remember who said that, Jean, you said that you were looking for what the changes were. Every time there is a new election, we have someone modify the student advocate toolkit because those dates change. There are sometimes changes in the law and that sort of thing. Those are all done for New Jersey, but there is a template for other states. So if you're interested in using that in your state, you can pick up the template, which I'll show you how to find, and you can modify it yourself. There are just certain slides that need to be adjusted for dates and that sort of thing. There are anything that is new, like a new lesson that would be included in our suite of lessons, has gone through a pretty rigorous process before it gets there. When a new lesson is written, it's either written by the young people on our Youth Voters Advisory Board or our ambassador program, and then it's reviewed to date. At least it's been reviewed by me. My background is in curriculum instruction, so I have a pretty good sense of what is going to work and what's not going to work in a classroom before we pilot it. And then we pilot it in a middle school, a high school, and a community college. And once it passes muster at all three levels, with adaptations, obviously, you're not going to do exactly the same thing in a middle school that you do at the college level. But once it passes muster, then it goes onto the website. We've had some where we've had teachers add wonderful activities to the Across the Divide, the lesson that we have on communication skills. We had one lesson on digital literacy that totally bombed. So that never got to the website. Right now, the education committee of the Youth Voter Advisory Board is working again on a digital citizenship lesson, they're calling it. And they're still working on it, and it hasn't gone through the whole review process yet, but you'll probably see that before too long. I would expect sometime this year. If you're going to adapt anything, there is a slide in each one that talks about our intellectual property rights. Everything is free. Everything can be used freely, but just give us credit for it. That's all we're really asking. If you create something new, a new slide, a new, like for the indigenous population, please give yourself credit for it. Put it on the slide itself so that we know who it came from and where it came from. Whenever you make a slide or adapt a slide, please carefully check whether or not there are copyright restrictions on that. The League of Women Voters has a whole bunch of free images that you can use. You can use the Creative Commons tab on Google Images, but you've got to make sure that nothing is going to come back to haunt you or haunt us because we've already been fined. That's how I learned. Thought it was a free image. It was not, and I hadn't checked carefully enough. And it doesn't matter whether you thought it was okay or not, you still get fined. So, so that's the only thing. And of course, if you're going to add a slide, just really double check it for accuracy. Have more than one person look at it, make sure that it is true. Sometimes we have actually had our Board of Elections look at things to make sure that they're accurate for us. Okay. So on to goals for today. You're going to experience the lesson yourself. You're going to find out where you can find these things and what extra materials are available to you when you're teaching either of those lessons that we're going to do today. And I also want to make you aware of the fact that there is a multilingual capability. The Timeline of Suffrage is available in Spanish as well as in English, and there is a dual language version as well. The slides are dual language. But lately, Pat Schmeidel, who is one of the other people like Fran, who has worked really closely, is piloting a program that will do simultaneous translation of anything that you do in dozens of languages. So when we are more comfortable and feel knowledgeable about that, we will make that available to anybody who is interested in teaching the lessons. Very exciting. Okay, The timeline of suffrage, as I said, has morphed. The first of the lessons went through the timeline up through 1920. And then after 1920, there was a brief section about the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act. And then it moved to the 1976 and the voting rights for 18-year-olds. And then it talked about today. We realized by working in schools that were not particularly upper white middle class schools, that we were missing a whole bunch of information that I didn't know beforehand. I will tell you, my eyes were opened widely by some of the people who were involved or who were in the classroom and said to us, well, that's not really right. You really need to think about this. And it was like, really? So we have added pieces to the timeline of suffrage, which has effectively doubled the time that it takes to teach the lesson. Each of the lessons, up until the time we boosted this, takes about 40 minutes to teach in a classroom. This one is about 80 minutes when you do the whole thing. There are, you can make some decisions about whether you're going to teach the whole thing in one shot. Like if you have block scheduling, that's a very reasonable thing to do. You can break it up into 2 days, which I have done, and it's just as effective that way. And if you're in a district where you think that the new information about the lack of ability of individual groups to gain the ability to vote rather than just the legal right to vote, it is still effective as it was originally taught. It's just that we're missing a whole bunch of stuff. I think personally, it is more important to have it taught, even if it's not a complete story, than it is to not teach it at all, because it is going to open people's eyes, even in that original form. All right, in order to find our lessons, you need to go to our website, which is energizingyoungvoters.com. When you open the website and go to the home page, right now there is this, which pops up about getting in touch. You can fill that out and say that you want to have information from us or where you want to have people work, but all you need to do is click on the little X and you get right to the website. This is the home page. You'll see what our vision and our mission is. And then down at the bottom, you can see that the website is divided into 3 parts right now. One page is for young people. The second one is for educators and community groups. That's where the curriculum is. And then the third page is for League of Women Voters members, and that has more of the voter registration information in it. We are updating the website. There is a lot to be changed, but at the present time, the community educators and community groups page is fine. You'll be able to use whatever you find on there. You can get to that page either by going to the Apple or going up to what we do, and then sliding down to educators and community groups. And then when you get to that page, you can scroll on down past the little image at the top. And this is where you will see the names of all of the lessons that we currently have. You can see that they reflect the 2 goals of the League. Fighting for the vote reflects empowering voters. Fighting for change is defending democracy. So those are the 2 things that we are aiming at by providing this curriculum. The modules on the left are the Fighting for the Vote, and that's where you see today's, the suffrage timeline, and then the Truth About Turnout. The other 3 lessons will be covered later on this week. On the right-hand side, you'll see Fighting for Change. There are the first 2, which deals with how do you determine what is it that you care most about, what issues are important to you, and then how do you affect change? How do you bring it about? The third one, the Across the Divide, was a request that we had from leagues to teach young people how to communicate with one another, how to listen to understand, and how to speak so that somebody else can actually, hopefully, understand you and not get their hackles raised. But let's look at today. So the suffrage timeline, this is what's happened. This is true for each one of the lessons. There's a very brief description of the lesson, and then there is a link to view the module, and there's a link to view a training video. After today, this particular class will be the one that will be there. But you can go to any of these and you will see that you can follow up on, if you want to see how to teach it, that's one of the ways you can do that. But we're going to view the module first. You can see that there are a couple of tabs. This is the Spanish. This is one that you can use as a template for other states. Make it yourself. Colorado has made a change. Montana has, and this is the one that's on the Washington State website that Judy was mentioning before. The slideshow and the script are here, but I'm going to go to the avatars first because the Timeline of Suffrage is an avatar game. And so you need to supply the students with an avatar that they will be for the course of the lesson. And it's important to distribute the avatars in the proportions of people who would have had the right to vote at different periods in history. So those directions are all here. And what I've done here is to show you what the percentages should be approximately at the end of the Revolutionary War, in 1856, at the end of the Civil War, in 1920, and in 1976. And then the last two categories are not a citizen. To make it easy, there are templates here that you can fill out with students' names. Now, we have 12 people here today. So I am going to use, I think I'm going to use the one for 15. So on the right-hand side, you can see that there are the names of avatars. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's see. If you go back here, there's a slideshow that has every one of the avatars. And there are 50 of them, I believe. Yeah, 50 different avatars. The other thing you can look at is this. And if you're going to, when you go in person, you'll have the actual cards printed. And so this is arranged so you can print 4 to a page, which is going to save you a lot of paper and a lot of time. If you teach the Timeline of Suffrage regularly, I would recommend that you print these once and get them laminated. That's what I've done, and they last forever. But just make sure that you leave space in between these. You need to cut them up first and then put them down on the laminate. Otherwise, your laminate will come off. But let's go back to the distribution list. All right. So in this case, because we only have 12 people here, I'm going to leave off just, let's see, 2, 4, 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to leave off 15, or the Sammy, and I'm going to leave off Allie, because those two people are not going to stand up when we play the game. And I'm going to leave off one of the D's. So I'm going to actually put your names in here, and that's who the avatar is going to be. And then I'll show you your avatar. So you've got your thing. So this will be Victoria. You're going to be George. Oh, wait a minute. Victoria's not here. That's going to be Barbara. So this is what you would actually be doing before you walk into the classroom or before you teach online. And if you're teaching online, I'll talk to you more about that. Okay, Cecile. Rebecca. Meg. Nikki. Fran. Mary Lou. Lily. Julie. Jean. Sean. Okay. Mary Lou, I'm going to change you. And then I'm going to be Shanna. Did I forget anybody, or is that 12? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. It is. Okay, so remember your name. And I'm going to, hopefully.
You forgot me.
Oh, who?
Christine.
Christine, I'm sorry.
No problem.
How do you like that? Your name's almost the same. Okay. Now, okay, on the avatar, George, there you are.
No, that's me.
That's you. All right. So do you see you're a man, white man, 64 years old, you own property. Don't worry about citizen, because there were no such things as citizens versus non-citizens up until the Civil War. So just remember those few things. Okay. And Cecile, you need Arthur. All right. So you're a white man, 45, and own property. Rebecca, you're Bill. So you're white man, 21, but you don't own property. Meg, you're Ted. How does it feel to be 99? Have you got those? Let's see. Nikki, you're Martin. So you're a black man, 40, and you own property and you're a citizen. There's where citizen is going to make a difference. And Fran, you're going to be David. So you're a black man, 45, you own property and you're a citizen. Lily, you're going to be Jill.
First woman there.
Okay, you're black, young woman, 25, don't own property. Judy, you're going to be Aretha. You're a black woman, 21, don't own property, but you're a citizen.
I got mine.
You're
I
gonna
got it.
You're gonna be Michelle.
Right.
Black woman, 54, own property and a citizen. Sean, you're going to be Peggy. Oh, get out of here. All right. Sean, are you back in yet? We're going to see where here's Peggy.
I am here. Oh, there we go.
Okay. I was looking for your card. So you're a white woman of 50. You don't own property, but you're a citizen. Mary Lou, you're going to be Rose. Oh, I hate these things. Okay, African American, 68, own property, and a citizen.
I'm Christina.
Yes, you're Christine. Christine is Christina.
Yeah.
That's my niece's name, actually. I like that name.
Oh, thank you.
Where did she go? There she is.
There it is. That's white.
No, Latina.
Oh, Latina there. Okay.
Woman, 21, don't own property, and a citizen. And then I am, I'm Shanna. Okay, just change my name. Okay, so I'm white, 18, don't own property, but citizen. All right, everybody have their characteristics?
Yes.
Okay, and you can see these, this is fine when I'm teaching like this, but if you are printing these out, you're going to save yourself a lot by actually doing them, having them printed 4 to a page. Okay, so that's the avatar. Any question about how to set it up so that you've got the right percentage of people for the number of people you have in a class?
If you had more than that, you'd have to double up.
No, good question. Okay, so this is 15. There's one for a class of 20, class of 25, class of 30.
Nice.
If you had more than that, you would just go back to that percentage chart that's right in the beginning and figure out how many you need to add to each one of the groups.
Oh, good to know.
Like, let's say you're doing an assembly and you've got 45 kids or something like that. If you have 50, you're more than 50, you're in trouble. And I will tell you that I have found personally that having a group of around 20 to 25 is really ideal. It works with the others too, but I love to see how the numbers change when you have that many or just a few more than that. Okay, so now, why does this pop up every time? Anybody know how to get it gone for good?
No, sorry.
All right. So now you're going to go back to where it says slideshow and script. And when it comes up, you will see this is what you're going to use when you're presenting to the students. And those of you who've seen this before, one of our young ambassadors said, that background that you have there, that's kind of dull. That's kind of old people. She said, let me redo it. So she has started with the Timeline of Suffrage and has put in a new template. And I think it looks very sharp. So I'm happy that she decided to do that. But so this is what you would use. I've hidden slides because you're not going to use those with the kids. That's just for your information. If you are teaching a class that is smaller than 10 or probably smaller than 12, there are slides in here that show you what a class of 25 would look like as you're progressing through the program. I'm going to leave those up so while we are going through the lesson, you can see how it changes, how this slide changes over the course of time, which helps people understand better what it looks like in terms of the voting population. So I'm going to leave that up. I'm going to turn this down and I'm going to go to the script. Okay, now if you think back to that video at the very beginning, that was Pat Schmeidel teaching the class, and she actually had this script in her hand, and she actually read it from the script. Now she knows it pretty well, but that's all right. You know, having it in your hand while you're teaching can sometimes make you feel more comfortable. It is a story, so reading a story makes sense. Even when it's not a story, having the paper there with you makes sure that you don't make mistakes. Now, what I usually do for myself, especially if I'm sharing a presentation with another person, which I highly recommend, by the way, because if there are two of you in the room, should something happen and one person need to leave for any reason, you have a backup. If some person gets sick, you still have a backup, so you don't have to worry about backing out of a presentation. What I do if I'm teaching it, I print it myself, but I also highlight the blocks that I'm teaching. So in this one, for example, let's see, let's just do it with this. So I'm only reading the words that I'm actually going to say. I see it highlighted instead of accidentally saying something that is directions to the teacher. Like here. I did have somebody at one time actually read the directions to the teachers by mistake. So that's how we learn. Okay, I'm going to go back up and take that off. Okay, and I printed out ahead of time. The slide picture at the side is a really handy thing when I'm making the presentation, because sometimes I talk as well as read what's in here, and then that is a way that I can quickly and easily get back to the slide that's on the slideshow. Okay, so right now I have that printed, and I'm actually going to read it to you as I would if I were teaching it in a classroom. Okay. I'm Pat Suplee. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and the League of Women Voters is an organization that began over 100 years ago when women were not allowed to vote yet. They fought for voting rights then, and we continue to work towards suffrage for all citizens who are eligible to vote, even today. We're nonpartisan. What that means is that we don't take sides in politics. We don't tell people who to vote for or what political party they should join. That's your choice. However, we do help people understand how important voting is and how to do it. Is suffrage a familiar term? And in most cases, some kids in college will know this, but not too many of them do. Suffrage actually means the right to vote, and that will pop up. This needs to be adjusted. I didn't notice that when I went through it last night. But suffrage means the right to vote. What does it sound like to you? What does suffrage sound like? And at this point in time, you can unmute yourself and you can just give me the answers to questions that I might ask you. So what does suffrage sound like?
Sounds like people were suffering before they had the right to vote.
And that is what students will tell you. And you can say, that's true. And though they're not from the same root word, there were many, many people who suffered and even died in order to get the right to vote. Why is it important for suffrage for us to have suffrage? Well, the people who win elections make laws. The voters decide who wins elections. So people without the vote are actually without power. Those in office don't listen to them. Instead, they pay attention to the voices and the needs of those who will keep them in that office, the voters. For this reason, from the very birth of our nation, people have fought, they've gone to war, they've gone to jail, and they have died for the right to vote. I'm going to ask you to open your minds today, and I want you to shift your perspective just a little to see the world as they saw it. Now, in New Jersey, and I'm going to skip through this one because in this case, you would change this based on your state. You would make it reflect your state. We had a recent change in law here so that even former felons can now register again and vote again after they've been released from prison, even if they're on parole or probation. So we're pretty happy about that. That was a league goal. Okay, so we're going to build the suffrage timeline. Each one of you has a card, or you know what's on your card in this case. You're going to be taking the identity of someone who is not at all like you, and that's okay. You might be a female, even if you're a male, or the other way around, and that's okay. I want you to take 15 seconds now to think about what it would be like to really be your avatar. Imagine being them. How would it feel? Like I said to somebody, how would it feel to be 99? How would it feel to be Black if you're white? What would your experience differ from what you know now? So 15 seconds. Okay. Because we're remote, I am going to be asking you to turn your screen off and on as your avatar is eligible to vote. In a classroom, because you've got the cards, what I do is I ask the students to stand up when they are eligible to vote. They don't stay standing the whole time, but the first people who stand up need to stand up each time. And you may need to prompt them a little to do that, but it's easy once you've done it one time. Okay, it's important to recognize that there were many people on this land before the original colonies were established. But for our presentation, we're going to start with the Revolutionary War and the establishment of the United States as a nation. Prior to 1775, we were the 13 colonies of Great Britain. Laws to control us were made by the Parliament in England. We couldn't vote. We had no representation in that Parliament. So we were powerless to control our own country. Because of that, eventually we declared our independence from England and started the Revolutionary War. This is a case where I'm going to ask you to shift your thinking just a little. I'd like you to think about the Revolutionary War as a fight for independence, yes, but it was also a fight for suffrage. It was a fight for the right to make our own decisions about our own nation. We won that war, and we became an independent country, but we paid a high price. 17,000 Americans died in the Revolutionary War, and many more were wounded or were prisoners of war. The Revolutionary War is one example of people actually dying for the right to vote. So we won the war. Now we had to decide on the rules that would guide our new nation into the future. The 13 colonies became 13 states, with each state having its own government. There was no central government yet to keep the states together. The founding fathers knew they didn't want a king. I mean, after all, they had just gotten rid of crazy George III. So they had to define something brand new. And a constitution was needed, clarifying the roles of the central government and of the states. The leaders of this new nation met and they argued angrily, especially about the enslavement of people. To achieve a constitution they all could agree to, they put off solving the issue of slavery. You might be tempted to think that everyone in the new nation would now be able to vote and have a say in how things would be run, but not yet. When it came to the debate over who could vote, one of the things the founders decided was not to define voting rights and requirements at the federal level. Instead, they gave that responsibility to the states. And this is a theme that you will keep returning to again and again. So here's your class of 25. Who can vote? All right, so this is the first election. It's 1788. It's the first US election. If you're a male, white, 21 or older, and own property, you are going to be eligible to vote. Okay, I am going to ask you, if you can vote, please leave your screen on. And if you can't, please turn your screen off. Okay, that's it. All of you fought in the Revolutionary War, but only Barbara and Meg are able to make the decisions for the rest of our country. So now, if we're in a classroom and we've got all these kids there, Fran, you've got to be off. You stay off. Thank you. All right. I kibitz with the kids. I say to them, okay, so you two are responsible now for making all the decisions. That means in school, you can decide what goes in the cafeteria lunch, or you can decide how many days a week school is going to be. How does that make you feel? And usually they'll go like, oh, this is great. I'm powerful. They'll, make muscles and that kind of thing. And then we go on. Leave your screens the way they are, please.
Oh.
Okay, so if you don't have enough people in the class, like if there are only 10 people, I would show this and say, okay, out of the 25 people, this is who can actually vote. And then we move on to 1856. Once the new nation finally had a constitution, oops, I'm sorry, all right. Let's move ahead 60 years or so to 1856. Westward expansion had occurred, and the number of states had expanded from 13 to 32. The population grew from 4 million in 1790 census to 23 million in the 1850 census. And customs were changing too. People no longer paid quite so much attention to social position. Instead, they were more impressed by people who could survive and who could cope with the difficult conditions as the westward movement took place. At this time, there were former soldiers who had fought in 2 wars, and they pushed for suffrage. They had risked their lives on the battlefields. Why couldn't they vote? Men who had fought in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 finally won the right to vote. But because voting rights were in the state's property, they had to go state by state by state. States had the authority to decide who could do it. So by 1856, the last state, which was North Carolina, gave up the property requirement as a condition for voting. So here we have, it's 1856, and who can vote? What we don't need to do now is to own property. So look at your avatar, and if your avatar is a male, white, and 21 years old or older, you can now let yourself be seen on the screen again. Okay. Look at this. It's doubled. The number of voters are twice as much. So how does it feel? Mary Lou, how does it feel to you to finally have the power to vote?
You're muted.
No, I'm sorry. I was looking to, it has to pop up. It's about time. Something my grandmother fought for, when she told me about that too. And that's the beauty of so many things that I think I know a lot of us are older than some of the current teachers, but I think we have so much to offer because our ages have given us the opportunity to live through things. I was only 18 in 1972. I got the right to vote. So when we give those personal stories about that, and I think we all can say that, it really is meaningful. So it has meaning to me, and that comes through in my presentations.
Good. One of the things that I would just caution you about is not too many personal stories, because
Right.
what we've found is that sometimes that turns the kids off. They're more interested in themselves than they are in us. Rebecca, it's 1856. You now have the right to vote too. How does it make you feel? And Mary Lou, you can keep your screen on now. You're voter eligible.
I feel empowered. I'm just starting out. I'm 21. I'm, ready to make some important decisions.
Good. Okay. Barbara and Meg, do you realize that your power was just cut in half? How does that make you feel?
Well, I would have been long dead because I was already 99.
Oh no, you're 99 and you now have the power to vote. Barbara, how about you? What does it do when you, all of a sudden your power is cut in half? You're muted.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't like that at all. I really want to have all the power.
Okay. And you will see the kids' eyes kind of open like, oh, I never thought about it that way. And that's the first time that we can set up for them the idea that there's always been this push and pull, that when new people gain the right to vote, older people who had it before don't have as much power anymore. And that can sometimes make for animosity among the groups. And I think you'll see that that's still happening today, but we'll get on to that. Okay, back to the slideshow. Okay. And again, here's the class of 25. So you can see that there are now quite a few more people. And the number of the people who have gained the right to vote now really overwhelms the first two who had the ability to vote. So that tension is going to be even greater than it was before. But let's move ahead again. The right to vote was not mentioned in the Constitution, and it wasn't until the end of the Civil War that the Constitution was amended to set the first nationwide rules about suffrage. Here's what happened. About the same time that the states were eliminating property ownership as a voting requirement, the country was facing the biggest challenge in our history, one that would have a profound effect on suffrage. In the mid-1800s, tensions between the South, which were slave states, and the North, which were the free states, escalated. The northern states wanted any new states to be free, and southern states wanted any new states to be slave states. The election of Abraham Lincoln brought those tensions to a head. The South withdrew from the Union and hostilities began. Between 1861 and 1865, America waged the bloodiest war in our history, the Civil War. The war was fought over the enslavement of people and the rights of African Americans. But in the end, it was also about suffrage. In 1865, the North won the war, the Union was saved, the enslavement of people ended, and African American men were given the right to vote. But the country paid in blood for this fight for the vote. Between 650,000 and 850,000 Americans died as a result of the war, more than in any war we've ever fought. 620,000 Americans equaled 2% of the nation's population in 1860. That would be the equivalent of losing more than 6 million Americans today. And just for reference, we lost 1.1 million during COVID. So that's pretty substantial. 1 out of every 4 soldiers who went to war did not come home. Freeing nearly 4 million formerly enslaved people left really important questions. What rights did the newly freed African Americans have? And were the formerly enslaved people citizens? And if they were citizens, could they vote? 3 constitutional amendments achieved the answers to those questions. In 1865, at the end of the Civil War, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution passed, and it ended slavery. In 1868, the 14th Amendment made all people born in the U.S., including the formerly enslaved, citizens. And that's the first time that word appears in our country. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution provides that with a few discrete exceptions, people born in the United States are citizens of this country, irrespective of race, ethnicity, or the national origin of their parents. 2 years later, in 1870, the 15th Amendment changed the suffrage laws across the country. It gave African American male citizens the right to vote. The 15th Amendment states that, and this is a quote, the rights of citizens to vote shall not be denied by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 15th Amendment is the first time the federal government steps in on the question of voting. So who has the authority to decide who can vote? And in this case, the states would be an answer that I would expect from the kids. And so this is the first time that the federal government puts a limit on that power. All right, so this wouldn't be crossed off yet, but we would ask the kids what would have to be crossed off here, and white would be crossed off. So now look at your avatar, and if you are a male and 21 years old or older, you can unblock yourself. So we should have.
Can that person be black?
This is the end of the Civil War, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So if you were a male and 21 years old or older, you should be on, we should see your face. I think we're missing a few people. Oh well. There should be, again, about 3 or 4 faces, 3 faces, I think, that would show up here. And this is why I said it's good to have the, so now you can see that, again, there's been an increase. But again, only 3 additional people compared to the first. And look at all this red spot around there. If you haven't been able to turn your camera back on yet, why can't you do that? Can you tell me, just unmute yourself and tell me why you can't vote yet?
Because I'm a woman.
Okay, somebody else?
I'm a woman too.
Okay,
And I'm a woman.
Oh, no,
I'm a woman.
Okay, I can't vote yet because I'm under 18, or I'm between 21 and 18, I think it is. I lost my paper in front of me. But at this point in time, you can see that there are far more people and it's far more representative government than it was before. But let's go back. Right, so all women could vote, had the legal right to vote after the 19th Amendment, but not all men or all women could actually vote. Once the 19th Amendment passed in 1920, the work for minority groups was not yet done. While Black men and women had the legal right to vote, in reality, they couldn't. And as we'll soon learn, Asian American Pacific Islanders, Indigenous people, Latinas and Latinos, also had to continue to fight for full voting rights all the way to 1965 and beyond with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. So at this point in time in a classroom, you would have all these people standing up. And on the screen, it's going to be hard for me to show you turning your screens back off, but I'm going to show you with this, the chart that's here. If your avatar is a Black man or a Black woman, would you please turn your screen back off? If your avatar is Indigenous, would you please turn your screen back off? If your avatar is a disabled person, would you please turn your screen back off? If your avatar is Asian, would you turn your screen off? If your avatar is Hispanic, would you please turn your screen off? All right, what just happened?
We shrunk.
Yeah. Lost voters.
About how many people are showing now? What, you know, if you think back through the years, what is this kind of representative of? All the way back to, pardon?
Before the Civil War.
Right, all the way back to about 1856.
Voter suppression.
That's it. Voter suppression was very effective at keeping white men who were 21 or older, who even those who didn't own property, in power, and suppressing the votes of many others. Now, obviously, there were women who could vote. There were some Blacks in some areas and some, not necessarily the other groups who could do it easily, but generally, it really cut out the minority populations that exist. Okay, so now what was the question that you had? Because at this point in time, there's like an emotional, like a breath in. People say, oh my gosh, what really happened here? You had a question. Who was it? Sean, was it you?
Yeah, I had a few questions. At the beginning, when you were mentioning, at the very beginning, when they were talking about creating the Constitution. And so in the script, there's no mention of the first Constitution, which was the Articles of Confederation.
No.
Okay. And also there's, I mean, there was local voting for town hall members when we were in the colonial period. So we are not even gonna, that's not.
Because of the time constraints, it really had to be much more drilled down into the thing that was really essential for the voting rights, even though even in New Jersey, for example, Blacks and women could vote very early, but then that right was taken away. So you just have to, you know, it's really hard to make it fit.
Yeah, it's hard to, and the emphasis on when you were chit-chatting about that example, when you were sharing how when the vote increased, those who had the power to vote first, originally their power was cut in half. And I was curious to know as why in that conversation that you didn't mention in the script that this was demonstrating an increase in democracy, even though it meant sharing the power.
I don't know why that specific comment wasn't in there, but that's the kind of thing that if you felt it was important to add, you could do that. You just have to watch the time limit that you have in the class period so that you don't, it's just like when you start using personal stories, that cuts into the time that you have for presenting the actual slideshow. So you just have to be cautious about it. That's all.
Okay. And I guess the thing that about the 14th Amendment, when you were talking about the three different amendments, I wonder if it's something that we should consider adding, where the 14th Amendment is a huge amendment, and it does do exactly what you were talking about. It finally defines in the Constitution, which was a kind of an interesting oversight by the founding fathers, the issue of citizenship, but it also established due process, the rule of law. And I have to ask myself how important it would be to add that component to that conversation of the 14th, especially as we find ourselves in a situation where so many people are not being offered that. So
I totally sympathize with what you're saying, but I think the focus of this is on voting rights and not on all of the other things that could be included in the history of our country. So I would probably not include that, but I do think it's important even in today's environment. And if that was something I had to leave out because a school wouldn't allow me in, if I said that it included the right to, for all people, even those without parents who were American citizens, I would leave it out instead of missing the rest of the story.
Yeah, I guess what I was thinking at the time too was the issue of due process plays into the actual right to vote. Once the 14th Amendment is given that right to citizenship, the importance of due process and protecting it. And the only other thing, Pat, I was curious about was when you do talk about the 15th Amendment and you were reading that it would not be excluded due to the different conditions of by race or previous condition of servitude, and the battle that women were fighting to get that three-letter word set.
The battle that women fought to help all of those people of the other race, the things that were not excluded, made them just as mad as could be, and that is what led to the fight for 1920. And so, yes, we could put that in. Again, you're talking about extra words and extra time, so you have to be careful. Sometimes I do, if there's a lot of anxiety among the girls that are sitting or the people who are sitting because they're not yet able to vote. I mentioned that they were a part of the process to get the right to vote for others, and then they felt really left out. And that kind of leads into the next section. So let's take a look at that. Right, and this is where we have the section that talks about a little bit about the Jim Crow laws and so on. And this was in the original one. So the fight for the vote encountered fierce resistance, and even today, it is still not over. We've seen how the state laws or the Constitution itself have changed over 2 centuries to remove barriers to voting, to include the poor, to include non-landowners, Africans Americans, and women, but there's much more to the story. Despite the trend toward greater suffrage, there's been a consistent push in the opposite direction. As we've seen throughout our history, there has been powerful resistance to allowing certain groups to cast their votes, even when the law has given them that right. So even though we've worked through major milestones in the fight for the vote, we're not.
Alexa set a timer for 1 hour.
1 hour timer.
There are setbacks and breakthroughs we need to talk about. The first setback to voting happened after the Civil War. There were places in the country where people went to extreme lengths to ensure that people of color did not vote. Local laws and state laws were passed that kept the races separated and did everything possible to prevent Black citizens from voting. These were called Jim Crow laws. The word Jim Crow means racial segregation and discrimination enforced by laws, customs, and practices. Jim Crow laws removed the political and economic gains made by Black people following the Civil War. Jim Crow laws also prevented Black citizens from voting and kept Black citizens out of the polls by using grandfather clauses, literacy tests, property requirements, removing names from voter lists for contrived reasons, poll taxes, preventing ex-convicts from ever voting again, and the threat of violence. Jim Crow laws were enforced until 1965, and punishment for defying them was really severe. Into the 20th century, men were lynched for trying to vote. While the women's suffrage movement had its roots in the anti-slavery movement, early suffragist leaders later split off from their alliance with abolitionists. They were angry that under the 15th Amendment, Black men would get the vote while white women were still denied. And Amira Davis is one of our young people again.
While the women's suffrage movement had its roots in the anti-slavery movement, early suffragist leaders later split off from the alliance with abolitionists. They were angry that under the 15th Amendment, Black men would get the vote while white women were still denied. When the 19th Amendment was up for debate, Southern politicians especially seethed over the prospect of enfranchising millions of African American women. The women suffragists faced a moral dilemma. Racist opposition in Congress have led to the defeat of suffrage for any woman. White suffragists turned their backs on the Black women who had also fought long for the right to vote. While technically the 19th Amendment gave Black women the right to vote, whites in the Jim Crow South knew all too well how to keep African American men from voting. Now they were going to keep Black women from the polls as well. 1920 and the passage of the 19th Amendment marked for Black women the start, not the end, of the fight for the right to vote, a fight which lasted until 1965 and the passage of the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Acts.
Okay, also excluded from the franchise. Oh, and I will say, if any of you have a young person of Indigenous background who would be interested in reading the script for this, if you would connect them with us, we would be happy to help them do that recording and then include it. So that what we'd like to do is to have a young person for each one of the groups that needed to continue the struggle. So anyway, also excluded from the franchise were Native Americans, many of whom were not made American citizens until 1924 with the signing of the Indian Citizenship Act. Until then, Native Americans were required to give up their tribal identities and tribal rights and move off reservations in order to be considered a U.S. citizen and to have the right to vote. Even though Native Americans had the right to citizenship and the right to vote in 1924, some states still found ways to keep them from voting. They weren't guaranteed the right to vote until the passage in 1965 of the Voting Rights Act. Voting rights activist Gertrude Simmons Bonin Sikalasa of the Yankton Sioux Nation was prominent in the women's suffrage community. She and other Native suffragists didn't want to only have U.S. citizenship. They simultaneously wanted recognition of their citizenship in tribal nations and their treaty rights, particularly to land. They wanted to use suffrage and U.S. citizenship to save their land and their communities. After the 19th Amendment was ratified, Bonin spent the next several years going to white women and saying, "Now you have the vote. Please fight for my people. Don't forget your Indian sisters."
Along with African Americans and Native Americans, other groups continued to be excluded from the right to vote. Asians came to the United States back in the 1800s to labor in the Hawaiian cane fields, build the Transcontinental Railroad, and to seek their own fortunes during the gold rush. Although their labor was invaluable, federal regulation prevented Asian immigration and birthright citizenship, so allowing Asian Americans only the right to vote starting in 1943. Among those advocating for suffrage was a young woman named Mabel Pinghua Lee. As a teenager, older than not many of you, Lee became a very powerful voice in the suffrage movement. People talked about her speeches and how the audience was mobilized by her ability to captivate the audience and keep their attention. Many suffragists thought she was phenomenal, so much so they asked the 16-year-old Lee to march on horseback in the front of a major suffrage parade in New York City in 1912. It would take more than 20 years after the 19th Amendment's ratification for Lee and the other Chinese American immigrants to become eligible for citizenship and thus win the right to vote. It was not until 1943 that Chinese immigrants could begin naturalizing as U.S. citizens. Truly broad access to American citizenship and voting rights was not available to Chinese and other Asian Americans until the Immigration and Nationalities Acts of 1962 and then the Civil Rights Acts of 1965. These removed the barriers to immigration and citizenship for many individuals.
Okay, the 1960s were years of social upheaval that included a national movement to end Jim Crow. Civil rights and voting rights activists, champions like Martin Luther King, emerged. Under their leadership and inspiration, Blacks and whites marched, demonstrated, held sit-ins, and risked their lives to struggle for Black rights. White and Black civil and voting rights activists in the South were beaten, arrested, and some were killed. A man was murdered for registering Black voters. 4 young girls were killed when the church they attended, which was the Center for Civil and Voting Rights meetings, was bombed, and dozens of activists were shot. But the activists continued to march and demonstrate. On the Selma to Montgomery March for Voting Rights in 1965, state troopers attacked marchers with nightsticks, tear gas, and whips. The violence was shown on national television and helped to shock the nation and move the president to act. We've heard several times now about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And on August 6, 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. Now, this was a law, not an amendment to the Constitution. The law gave the federal government the right to review any changes to voting laws in southern states that had a history of voter suppression. It restored the ability to vote to groups that long held the legal right to vote, but were stopped due to voter suppression. So it's 1965 now. Those of you, men and women, who are Caucasian, Black, Asian, Native American, disabled, you can turn your screens back on if you have the legal and the legal right and the ability to vote. And then, of course, in person, you'd have them all stand back up again.
Did you include Hispanic or Latina?
I should. They should.
That was already maybe.
No, I didn't. I take that back.
Okay.
Right now, including Black, women, Asian, and Indigenous people. Right. The next milestone in the suffrage timeline is the 26th Amendment. Another change to the Constitution this time about suffrage happened in 1971, when the 26th Amendment to the Constitution lowered the voting age to 18. We've just seen that the fight for vote in 2 of the 3 cases we've covered involved war, the Revolution and the Civil War. The 26th Amendment indirectly involved war as well. Here's the background. Every male in the US, even today, is required to register with the Selective Service on his 18th birthday. At the time of the Vietnam War, America was involved. And to get the number of soldiers that they needed, the military drafted soldiers from the pool of men that had registered when they turned 18 with the Selective Service. The Vietnam War was very unpopular with a large part of the American public, and there were public protests against the war, and many Americans, especially the young, wanted to end our involvement. Of those who died during the war, and this blows me away, over half were young men between the ages of 18 and 20. Those men who had no vote, no say in whether the war should be carried on at all. Those new soldiers were old enough to fight, but too young to vote. And protesters wanted to change that. The 26th Amendment was passed more quickly than any other amendment in our history, and 18-year-olds were given the right to vote. So what do we need to change now? We need to change the 21 to 18. And at this point in time, even I would be able to stand up. All right. But the struggle continued. The 1965 Voting Rights Act allowed those Puerto Rican citizens living still in Puerto Rico to vote using the Spanish language. But mainland Puerto Ricans and other Hispanics were still denied. When they went to vote, they were given a literacy test. They were told, if you can read this, you can vote. And if they couldn't read English, they couldn't vote. And there was one more group who still faced barriers to voting. Lower turnout. This is brand new. This is a young man who is blind, who now explains what goes on.
There is still one more group who face barriers to voting. Lower turnout among people with disabilities was a result of barriers to the ballot box. Imagine using a wheelchair or walker and not being able to enter your polling place because there was no ramp, the doors were too narrow, too hard to open, or that the pathways to the voting area was obstructed. Imagine being blind and encountering a voting machine that did not offer audio or large print ballots, or a polling place that lacked proper signage. Several federal laws now protect voting access for individuals with disabilities. The 1984 Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act mandated accommodations so voters with personal physical challenges now have greater ability to vote. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 provides a national mandate for eliminating discrimination against individuals with disabilities. The Help America Vote Act of 2002 specifically provides that an accessible voting system must provide individuals with disabilities the same opportunity to vote privately and independently that others would enjoy.
The inability to read and write English, as well as violence, gerrymandering, and intimidation, were still being used in states, particularly the Southwest, to deny Latinos the right to vote. In 1974, the Southwest Voter Registration and Education Project, which was the first and largest nonpartisan Latino voter participation organization in the U.S., started operations with founder William C. Velasquez and other Mexican-American political activists. On August 6, 1975, exactly 10 years after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, President Gerald Ford amended the act to also end discrimination against so-called language minorities. Protecting the voting rights of Latinos, as well as other non-English speaking groups, made it possible to translate registration materials into other languages and strengthened the political power of communities of colors. Now things might be looking good. It might seem that all U.S. citizens 18 years old and older can vote, but even today, things are not always perfect. Voter suppression still continues in many ways. Some states remove voters' names from the polls, and their reasons for doing so are not always valid. Often the problem is not resolved in time for a person's vote to be counted. In some states, elections officials shut down polling places in certain neighborhoods or cut back the number of voting machines. Voters in these neighborhoods have to wait for hours in line to cast their votes. Some states require voters to show ID when they vote, and they require forms of ID that are difficult for certain populations. Some states, for example, require street addresses, but what about the homeless? What about some Native Americans living on reservations that may not have street addresses, but post office boxes? Some states require college students to have an in-state driver's license to register to vote. The fight for the right to vote continues today. A Supreme Court decision in 2013, Shelby County versus Holder, gutted the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court ruled that places with a history of suppressing voting rights in the South were no longer suppressing the vote. So states were no longer required to submit changes to their election laws to the U.S. Justice Department for review. In her dissent, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously stated that gutting the Voting Rights Act when it was working was like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. In other words, if it's working, why get rid of it? 5 years after the ruling, nearly 1,000 U.S. polling places had closed, many of them in predominantly African-American counties. There were also cuts to early voting, purges of voter rolls, and imposition of strict voter ID laws. All right, there are some additional slides in that show, but they're about the, one of them is a timeline that you've already seen. One of them is a video from one of our EYV interns encouraging people to join our ambassador program. And one of them is a slide that shows our social media links. And then there's a slide that has the I used to think, but now I think exit ticket that I told you about. All right, so now if there are any other questions that came up about that, please, this is your time to ask.
I have one again, Pat. I don't know if it's so much a question. I think it's more a comment, but I thought it was kind of interesting that I had this aha moment that I don't remember ever having previously. And it was when you were giving the presentation about the Native Americans, and we talked about the 14th Amendment and citizenship being gained, and the statement in the Constitution that any person born in the United States is a citizen, yet that was not true for the indigenous people of our country.
Tribal lands were not considered U.S. territory.
Yeah. And that was a pretty interesting moment of how that was such a contradiction to the Constitution's 14th Amendment statement on citizenship.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I have a comment. It's very impressive what you've done. Very impressive.
Do you now see the screen that has the excuses for not voting on it?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Again, there's a chart to assign them, but the only reason I do this is when I'm teaching remotely, like I teach citizenship classes, and I just send this to the teacher so the teacher can give the students one of the excuses ahead of time. There is a page that has some additional excuses on it, but these cards are set up the same way that the avatar cards on. I print them front to back. So like there's an excuse on one side, and on the other side, there is one possible response that is a decently good response. You can see there's another possible response. And another one. So you can see what I'm talking about when I say the excuses cards. Now that they are used at the at the end of this lesson. And the nice thing about them is that you can use one or you can use 20. It depends on how much time you have left after you've taught the actual lesson. And I usually leave a set of them with the teacher because it's one of those things that, like if you teach high school and you get, it's a 40-minute period and you have finished what you wanted to do in 38 minutes, you have 2 minutes left over. So you can say to the kids, okay, you can talk to each other for a few minutes until the bell rings, or you can pull out an excuse card and teach them something. So I find it very helpful to have these ahead of time and to share them with the teachers. Get away.
I really like this, Pat, because, you know, to have it written and then people sharing out what the excuses are that people give, I think is really exposing, you know, those excuses for what they are. So I really
your excuses, you're right. And one of the things that you might consider doing as you take your first steps into this is to use those cards at a league meeting. I did that once and I was astounded at how difficult it was for people to formulate the answers that they could have given to somebody to an excuse that you would hope we'd have a very quick answer to. I figure even if you get through three, you've got three excuses, and everybody in the room now has the answer to it. Because of the way the game is set up, I'll talk to you about that at the very end, but I want to get back to the module itself. So
I just have one question for you about the excuse cards. On the answer part, Pat, would we need to make sure that whatever the answer is fitting to the state we're from?
Yes, okay. Definitely. Thank you for asking that. That's really important. Okay, now for this one, you're going to have your chat box open. And I am going to have to go back and forth between the the two. Now, if you have a class that you can do this right after the timeline of suffrage, you will save yourself some time, because this just is a review of what we just went through. If you've just finished the timeline of suffrage, don't take the time to do this. Take the time to go into the other things. So let's start with this. We've talked about how important it is to vote, to have your voice heard so that the future is what you want it to be. So let's look at who is voting and whose voices are being heard. I would like you to write in the chat what percentage of people who were eligible to vote, so that means not just the registered people, but people who were eligible to vote in the last presidential election, actually voted. In the chat, write a number, please. All right, 65, 68, 40, 40. Any more? 25, 30. Okay, so that's what they see in the beginning. And then you show this. Now, when I'm in a classroom, I generally have some prizes with me. And I do this thing, like I say, all right, if you thought that there were more than 90% of the people who voted, you can sit down. If you thought there were 80% of the people, would you please sit down? And so on, until we get down to between 60 and 70. And then we narrow it down individually, like 68 to 70, 65 to 68. And when we get down to about 63 or 64%, those kids get a prize. And it may not be, I mean, it may have been a pure guess, but it's more likely to remember, the other kids in the class are more likely to remember what the percentage of turnout actually was. So, and it wasn't always that way. In 2016, the percentage of the turnout was only about 55%. And of course, we're going to see that midterm elections are even worse. All right. This slide is a build. So again, in person, what I do is I give the kids sticky notes and I have them write down one issue that they care about the most. And then I have them walk up and stick that sticky note onto a board and I read them aloud while they're doing it. But if you care about, for example, immigration, your vote can make a big difference between having a realistic immigration on policy or not. The same thing is true with the environment, or with guns, or with taxes, or war, or healthcare, or education, or anything else that you put up here on the board that you really cared about a great deal. And you'll notice that on this slide, there are single word topics. And the reason for that is to try to be as issue agnostic as possible. Because putting down something like abortion can be viewed as a left-leaning issue, whereas pro-life would be the right-leaning part. So healthcare kind of absorbs both of those. We used to have gun control as one of the words in one of these stars. And I taught this in a very red district. And one of the kids said to me, you can't put that down. And I said, dumb as I was, why? And he said, because gun control is what the lefties want. Gun rights are what I want. And so I said, all right, how do we fix it? How do we make it so that it applies to everybody? And the word guns was what they accepted as fair for both sides. So that's the kind of thing that you have to be careful of. If you're creating your own slides, you want to make sure that they're fair. But I am always saying to people, if you see or hear anything that I say or anything that's on the slides that doesn't align with your beliefs, that you think shows the other side is being favored, you need to let me know so that we can fix it. And that's a couple of times that's happened. This was one of them. Okay, this is one that you would have to adapt if you're in another state, but we go over what the requirements are in New Jersey to vote. But this is where we spend a lot of time. Later on, students are going to spend a lot of time reading graphs, and you want to make sure that they can tell from that graph what they can know for sure and what is a reasonable assumption they can make by looking at the graph. This YouTube video, I think, is pretty good. It takes 4 minutes, though, so I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to show you myself. I'm going to ask you to take a look at that yourself afterwards. But this is the graph that we actually start asking the kids to answer questions about. So we say to them, take a look at that graph. What is something that you think you can say for sure when you look at that graph? I want you to notice a couple of things before you give me your answer, though. In most graphs, what you expect to see in the left-hand side is from 0 up to 100. And notice this graph. It only goes from 30 to 65. That's going to change the way something looks. You'll also notice that the number of years between each of the things on the horizontal axis is 6 years. Why do you think the graph maker might have made it 6 years instead of 4 years, which is what we usually think of as a presidential cycle or as the cycle of voting, 4 years? Once they do that, the kids will look at it and they'll say, well, you can tell for sure that there was greater turnout in presidential elections than there was in midterm elections. And that's perfectly legitimate. You can also tell for sure that the greatest percentage of people who turned out during these years for a presidential election was just, let's see, 1964. And you can tell that the lowest turnout was in 1924, and 1920 was closer to that. So think back to some of the things that were going on in history at those two times, and that might give you some insight into what was happening there. You can also look at the midterm elections, and somebody will say, wow, 2018 was the highest number. That was pretty close in time. Highest number, highest turnout. And the other time when there was pretty high turnout in a midterm election was in 1966, I guess it was. Why do you think that might have happened? Think back to the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That might have impacted that, but you can't tell me what it was that caused that by looking at this graph. What you can tell me is that that was the highest turnout. And so we asked them to give us a couple of other things that they can think they know for sure, and a couple of things that they might be able to assume by looking at this. So they're getting some practice in reading it for to determine the difference between data they can depend on and the assumptions that they might make from it. All right, this is another one that we can use to help them adjust their thinking so that they're making that distinction between fact and assumption. So let's break this down a bit. We are going to look at some data that represent different what are called cohorts of voters or groups of voters, depending on what group they belong to. So we're going to look at age, we're going to look at ethnicity and race, and we're going to look at level of education. So right now, I want you to be whoever you are. So for most of these kids, it's going to be 18-ish, less or more. Their ethnicity is going to vary widely, and their level of education is either going to be haven't graduated from high school yet or are in college working, unless you work with an older group. As you look at the graphs that we're going to show you, I want you to see what you think the data says for sure about the group you belong to. You can also make assumptions, but you want to be pretty sure that you can support those assumptions with data. Really, what you can see is for sure on the graph. You'll be asked to jot down what you notice, and later you'll use your notes when you work in a small group to compare your observations. All right, so this is what the slides look like. Here's the first one. And again, notice in all cases but one, and that's because the graph is screwed up. And also I'll tell you, this one shows the 2024 turnout among youth. We have one of our young ambassadors working right now on updating these slides so that all of them represent the years from 2000 to 2024. They don't all do that yet. But at any rate, the youth, the age does reflect that. So these graphs go from 0 to 100, and they go from 2000 to 2024. Now remember, most of these kids were not alive before like 2008, 2004 maybe, if you're in college. All right, so look at that. This represents the voter turnout among 18 to 24-year-olds in the presidential elections from 2000 to 2024. What do you know for sure? And what can you make the assumption of? Now I'm going to show you some other ones. Here is 25 to 44. Here is 45 to 64. And here is 65 to 74. Okay, looking at those four lines on a piece of paper that you might have nearby, write down one thing you can know for sure and one assumption that you can probably make by looking at these. All right, so at this time, the kids are all working individually and they're writing these things down for themselves. The next group shows voter turnout by race and ethnicity. So again, be yourself. All right, this is the line that represents voter turnout if you're white. This represents the voter turnout if you're Black. This is Hispanic turnout. And this is Asian turnout. Now, this is all taken from the U.S. Census data, and these categories, Hispanic and Asian, have changed over time, but this is what they are right now. Look at those graphs, write down one thing you can know for sure, and one assumption that is pretty reliable. Okay, and the next is turnout by level of education. All right, this is the voter turnout, and this is the one graph that was made incorrectly. So this one only goes from 30 up to 100, but the others, it's straightened out so you will see comparable information. This is voter turnout from people who have less than a high school education. This includes high school grads. This includes people who have some college or a college degree. And this is people who have some kind of a postgraduate degree. So again, write down something you know for sure and something that you can assume. Okay, and then in person, I put the kids into small groups of usually 3 or 4 so that it doesn't take an enormous amount of time for them to share. When I do this online, I usually put people into breakout rooms of the same number, but I don't want to do that today because I'm running out of time and I don't want to not be able to finish what's in here so that you can see the structure of the whole thing. But at any rate, each kid in each small group reads what things they can know for sure from the graphs that they've seen. So they all share that. And then they all share what the assumption is that they made. And then together, they have to come up with a single sentence or statement that they can all agree to that describes who has the power today. And once they've done that, then we move to this slide. So who's making the decisions? Well, it turns out that historically, if you're old, if you're white, and if you're well educated, it is much more likely that you'll vote. And that means that you have the power today. Now, in the voter turnout turns out to be a big deal. In the slideshow, there are additional slides that show the increase in Hispanic turnout versus white turnout. And there are also some slides that have a lot of information on them that you can turn to if you want to know specific information. I would also encourage you to take a look at the US Census Bureau website for voter turnout. It's comprehensive and you can find out an awful lot. If you are only interested in youth voter turnout, the place to go is Circle, CIRCLE.org. It's at Tufts University, and you can find it by searching for Tufts and then Circle. And it is comprehensive in its analysis of youth voter turnout. It has community recommendations. It is very, very valuable. So please take a look at that.
And Pat, I'll add that they do give you breakout by your state.
Yes. Actually, breakout by county in your state. It's amazing.
Yes, it's a great site.
Okay, so turnout turns out to be a big deal. And if you want politicians to make the decisions that you want them to make, then you have to get involved. You have to vote. And you have to elect the people who reflect your values on those issues that we talked about earlier. So is there change ahead? Perhaps. Here are some of the numbers on the this was made prior to the 2024 election, but there were going to be 41 million new Gen Z voters eligible to vote. 8 million of them newly eligible. And 47% of those were people of color. In the next presidential election, the majority of voters will be people from 18 to 49 years of age, and 2/3 of those people will be people of color. This is a graph or a chart that, a bar graph that demonstrates that. All right, so you're the people who are most likely to influence other people your age to vote. How can you do that? Here's what we know about human behavior that helps us understand what we can say and do and why it works to help other people think it's important to vote. So the first one of those is to make it the norm. That we have to help people register to vote. We have to help them make a plan to vote. We have to remind them about election day. And then we want to use psychology. By using psychology, the first thing that we want to do is to make it the norm. Make people feel as if everybody votes. Everybody who's important votes. Because people want to fit in. Humans are motivated to do what others around them do. And voters who knew that their friends hit the polls were 8.1% more likely to vote than a control group. Establishing that voting is the norm and is expected in your circle of friends is important. And you can do it with something simple like saying, we're all going to the polls together and then we're going out for pizza. Do you want to come with us? The other thing we can do is to call them names, and the language that you use here is important. If you say, are you going to vote? That's a one-time action. But if you say, are you a voter? That means that that is a part of your identity. Deep in our brain, there is a difference between those two things. If it's an aspect of your identity, it implies that you're an upstanding citizen, you're politically conscious, you're socially active, and or you're patriotic. And when people perceive themselves or want to be thought of as any of those things, then they'll want to be called voters, and that will help them motivate them to get to the polls. You can also address their commitment issues, and that is to help them make a plan. Did you ever say something like, I'm going to exercise more, but then you failed to follow through? I sure have. Or I'm going to budget better, but then fell short. This will happen to some of your friends on election day. They'll say they vote, or they will vote, but then they'll forget, or they won't find the time. We're much more likely to translate goals into actions if we make a concrete plan. So what can you do? You can help them do that. Say something like, are you going to vote in person or by mail? Do you have your vote by mail ballot? If not, when are you going to the polls? How are you going to get there? Do you want to go with me? Do you want to have a ride? And then promise that you'll follow up, because nobody likes to let a friend down. So you can say something like, I'll text you after election day and see how it went the first time around. All right, so why don't some people vote? All right, and this is where the excuses game comes in. So here you pass out the excuses card and you say to the kids, all right, you each have one excuse. Read the excuse on the front of your card and then flip it over and read and get into your brain what is an answer to that excuse. And you give them a minute or two to do that. And then you pick somebody at random. You can, use a roll book. You can just, throw a ball or something like that. And whoever gets it gets to read their excuse first. And you make sure that they read it before they pick on somebody, because you want everybody listening to what that excuse is. Once they've read it, then they can pick on somebody. They usually pick on one of their friends and put them on the spot to answer that excuse. What would you say if somebody said, if the election is close, I'll vote? Or it's such a long process to register, I don't have the time. So the kid in the class then has to come up with these words. And if they don't come up with a sufficient answer, then the child or the student with the question on the excuse on their card that started this can ask other people to fill it in, or they can turn the card over and read the excuse that's on the other side. That reduces a lot of anxiety if they know that they're not going to be put on the spot for this. Once that's done, you'll have lots of laughter. Then the person who was put on the spot first gets to read their excuse card and do the same thing. And then you continue for as long as you have time left. And you will always have lots and lots of giggles and lots of fun. And get back here. All right. That was the speed version of this. It takes more time when the kids are doing it because they're writing down those things and then they're talking in small groups. But the actual structure of the lesson is what you went through there. And now you know how to use the excuses card, I hope. But I'm wide open to questions now. We have a few minutes.
I'm curious, Pat, about when this slide was up that you were making the lists of make a plan and those sorts of things. I was curious about in the program if there was some discussion or conversation about how to help people make good choices.
That's a different lesson. Yes, there is, but that's called Vote by Design. And that lesson comes later in the week, but it's adapted for every kind of election that you can think of, primaries and general and state and Board of Education and so on. So I think it's going to answer your question. I hope you're going to come to that. All right.
Yeah, I will. I've registered for all of them. So.
Awesome. Judy?
Yeah, I'm curious how we get a hold of the new templates with the updated data on them.
As soon as they're available, as soon as they've been checked, they will be on the website.
So I went through the module 2 that I have now, and there were 21 slides with data on them.
And you pick and choose. Those are the things that are extra materials that you can turn to if you know there's going to be a particular interest in one of the topics.
Has there been many changes in module 2 that you just showed us?
No. No.
Okay.
The biggest
Thank
change
you.
is going to be the graphs with the updated information.
Good. Okay.
And then
Okay.
the template that will be used, the
Thank you.
background.
And then you'll alert us when it's available, or you'll mail it to us, or
Well,
what's going to
it'll be on
happen
the
there?
website. I will do my best to remember. I'm going to make that Fran's job. Fran, put a tickler in the calendar. And when they come out, we will notify all the people who registered for this that is available. That's really a good point, Judy. I'm glad you brought it up.
Thank you.
Very good, Pat. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the rest of the week. Today was one.
Good. I'm glad. There, I need to get out of there. Okay. Those of you who'll be here other days, I'm looking forward to having you back again. Tell your friends, and thank you very much for coming.